So today we're diving into a sensitive and timely topic, conversion therapy. There's a Supreme Court case where oral arguments were just heard, Childs versus Salazar, and it deals with a lot of issues. It deals with issues anywhere from is talk therapy protected by free speech? It deals with issues about whether talk therapy is under the same licensure agreements as other medical procedures. And front and center of what it deals with is this question of whether conversion therapy is harmful to queer minors. And if it is, should it be banned by states? So no one better to talk about this than Dr. Chris Beals, who is a faculty member in psychology. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with you telling us about your research and the lab you run here.
Okay, so here at Cal State Fullerton in the psychology department, I run the Q lab, or what we call the queer lab. I run this lab importantly with two other faculty members, Professor Amanda Perry and Professor Michael Baker. I could not do it without the two of them. And we kind of study all topics related to LGBTQ people and their experiences. Often from a social psychological perspective. So we're looking at their relationships, their identity development, the effects of discrimination and oppression on their lives. We have lots of students running interesting thesis projects, and we stay very busy.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. So, this case deals with then the process that queer young people might be experiencing as they are navigating coming out, which is exactly the things that you study. And in particular, it deals with this question of conversion therapy. So let's start by grounding that question.
Okay.
What is conversion therapy?
So conversion therapy is this idea that young people who may be questioning or coming out as queer, whether it's about sexual orientation or gender identity, that can be changed from mental health professionals working with them. This has been being done for 50 years probably. And certainly in the last 20 or 30 years has been mounting evidence showing that it doesn't work, and that it's unsafe and that it harms young people, which we can talk more about exactly what that means. But in this therapy, historically, initially, often it was using aversive therapies. And so they would try to pair a young person's attractions with negative feelings or experiences. Things like shock was often used, also creating feelings of nausea. So they would show images that might be sexually arousing and then pair it with something awful like that. Or things like having a rubber band that every time you have a same-sex attraction thought, you have to create some pain in yourself. Most of those types of ways of doing this have since been moved away from, but now it's often talk therapy, which is about talking to people, trying to get them to think of these behaviors and attractions and feelings as bad, as wrong, as sinful. Much of this therapy is actually not done by mental health professionals, but by clergy. In one study, it showed that the vast majority of young people who experienced this type of therapy was being done by clergy. I believe it was only 38% was actually being done by mental health professionals.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And I think under most of these laws, clergy could still do that, right?
Yes, that is accurate.
Yeah. So right now we're in October 2025, and what brings us together to talk about conversion therapy is the Supreme Court just heard oral arguments in this case, Childs versus Salazar. What is this case about?
So there's a counselor in Colorado who wants to be able to do conversion therapy. She's a licensed therapist, and Colorado has a ban where licensed medical professionals or mental health professionals are not allowed to do this therapy. And she runs a practice that she states is religiously informed, and therefore she believes that she has the right under free speech to do this sort of talk therapy. And so that's the main argument that they're using, is that you can't control what she says in therapy under her free speech rights. But being that she's licensed as a mental health professional, she should also have to uphold the standards of best practice and scientifically proven therapies, which this is not. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Supreme Court does with this argument.
Um, so now to pan out a little bit and talk about what you found in your research and in your lab, what do we know about the queer minor experience of coming out?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that there's nothing wrong with queer minor. There's nothing damaged. There's
Mhm,
nothing inherently flawed, right? And
mhm,
so people are trying to fix something that doesn't need fixing, right?
mhm,
And so, I wish that was the end of the conversation, but it's not. And so we do know from a couple recent big studies. There was a study done out of Stanford Medical School with thousands of queer young people. And then another study that came out of the Williams Institute, which is at the UCLA Law School.
mhm,
And both these studies showed the same thing, that young people who experienced conversion therapy went on to be adults who had more depression, more post traumatic stress disorder, more suicidal ideation,
mhm,
and that and also that it doesn't work, right?
mhm.
And so they're having all these negative, harmful experiences, and yet are still having same-sex attractions or gender identities that that fall under the queer umbrella. So it neither works and it hurts people,
Right.
and yet we still see people wanting to do this.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that is coming out is people say, well, people are asking for it, right?
Mm,
Young
yeah.
people don't want to be queer, and so if people are asking for it, then we should be helping them away from it. And what I think's not being appreciated in that discussion is the reason why kids, right? We're talking about children here. The reason
Right.
why kids are asking sometimes for help is because either their parents or their clergy members are pressuring them to do so, and because the world is not supportive, right? The societies are not supportive. When you take away discrimination, oppression, stigma, aggression, microaggressions,
Mhm.
kids wouldn't want to change, right?
Right.
It's the world telling them to change, not something inherently wrong with them.
So, what type of support, or what types of questions might children have as they are going through their coming out experience?
Yeah. So I should preface it by saying I'm not a developmental psychologist, right? And
Mhm,
so a lot of that would fall under kind of the purview of looking at development.
mhm,
But certainly, as kids recognize that they're different
mhm,
than their peers, that are having different thoughts, different ideas about things they want to do, different feelings, right?
mhm,
As they experience difference, that's stressful, right? It's stressful to be a child and to experience something different from your peers. So often they're asking questions, they're
mhm,
seeking models, they're talking. Often teachers are a place of support
mhm,
and care. And so they're needing to try to understand how is what I'm feeling fit in with other people's experiences
mhm,
that may not be modeled in their home. I mean, being queer is an experience that often there may be no one else in your home
mm,
experiencing the same marginalization, and that's very different than a lot of stigmatized identities. If you grow up a person of color, likely your whole family are people of
mhm,
color, so they can help you through the process of how do you cope with stigma, with discrimination, how do you
mm,
push back, how do you be an activist, or these types of things. And often a queer kid might feel very alone. One thing that I wanted to make sure I said was that research is very clear that having just one supportive adult is enough, often to help kids kind of find confidence in themselves, to make people much less likely to be thinking about suicide or
mm.
to attempt suicide. And so this messaging about you should be changed, which is really what conversion therapy is about,
Right.
is the exact opposite of what kids are needing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Um, so what are there are currently, I think, a little over 2 dozen states that ban
Yeah.
conversion
Yeah.
therapy. So would make it illegal for a minor to go to a therapist, and then the therapist has the goal to make them
Right.
straight, right? Um, why would these bans
Yeah.
exist?
I mean, those bans are recognizing, again, the mountain of research suggesting it's harmful.
Mhm,
And, I think you look at the list of organizations that are saying this is bad, right? We should not be doing this to children. It includes the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics have
Mhm.
all said, conversion therapy should be banned, and is not efficacious, and it creates these harms.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, as you can imagine, states are supposed to be protecting children, and thus we
Mhm.
see these bans in place.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in particular, I think one of the things that the case makes so clear is these are medical professionals who have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the patient that comes to them is safe from harm and has effective treatment, right? And I think that argument that this isn't banning ministers from having these
Right.
private conversations, or life coaches,
Yeah.
but that there's a special category of professionals that
Yeah.
we always say have to follow
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
research consensus.
Yeah.
And though one of the parts of the argument that I find interesting is, and I was listening to oral arguments. I don't
Yeah.
know who's talking,
Yeah.
but somebody points out that there was a time in the past, in like the 1970s, where the medical establishment viewed queer people as mentally ill.
Yeah.
And if the state had the power to go with that consensus, it would have caused more harm, right? So, I think that that's interesting, like this tension of when do we decide that there's a medical consensus?
Yeah.
But it sounds like from your perspective, there is a really strong research.
Yeah, and I think not just from my perspective, right, but the American
Yeah.
Medical Association and
Yes.
all these other people, and kind of bigger picture, taking it even a step further back, is this idea that sexual orientation is something that is wrong and should be changed.
Mhm.
That's a relatively modern thing as well, right? We've socially constructed ideas that there's a right way to be sexual and to experience attraction. The same thing with gender and the gender
Mhm.
binary. If we look throughout history, there are lots of times and places
Mhm.
where variability was just simply variability in
Right.
attractions and in understanding gender on a spectrum as opposed to a binary. And
Mhm.
so we can look back to the 1970s and think like, oh, well, then they thought, we thought this as a
Mhm.
medical establishment. But you can go back further and be like, oh, in some places, this has clearly been socially constructed, and it's
Mhm.
connected to patriarchy and to
Mhm.
colonialism, and to trying to control bodies and women's bodies in particular,
Mhm.
right? So we can connect all these things together and
Mhm.
realize that this is made up, or socially constructed, I guess is a better way to say that,
Yeah.
to serve certain purposes.
Yeah. And to dive in more into that, or maybe restate some of these things there, let's try to get into the mind of the folks who want to allow conversion therapy to exist. What do we, what might their arguments be?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it's grounded in kind of a motivated reading of like Judeo-Christian scripture,
Mm-hmm.
right? And by motivated, I mean they're motivated to protect, the powers that be around some of these
Mm-hmm.
belief systems. In my queer psychology class, when we talk about stigma, we talk about like why is it so hard to get rid of stigma, right? Why do we still have people hurting other people based on social identities? And one of the things we talk about is terror management theory, right? This idea that people need a worldview to protect their sense of self, and to kind of keep at bay existential anxiety. And one way we do that is to protect with just viciousness our own worldview. Well, if your worldview is a worldview that says there's only one word that's true and we need to follow it carefully, and then again you use motivation to interpret scripture and
Mm-hmm.
things, people want to protect that, because when you see deviations that seem to be doing okay, like, oh, look, those gay people are happy and healthy, wait,
Mm-hmm.
that's not supposed to be happening,
Right.
it must be wrong, it must be sinful. And of
Yeah.
course I'm simplifying that a lot.
Are there groups in particular that are pushing for conversion therapy to still be a mode of treatment?
Yeah, so there's these kind of religiously based organizations that kind of help connect people and therapists who are interested in promoting and pushing conversion therapy. And
Mhm.
a big one in the past was this group called Exodus International, and they were like all over the country doing this sort of work during the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And then
Mhm.
interestingly, in 2013, their president at the time, he ended up apologizing for the past work of Exodus International, and saying, that he had come to realize that so many of the people they thought they were helping, they were actually harming.
Mhm.
And it kind of created a big uproar in, the religious communities that were connected to Exodus International. It didn't just stop happening. Then, of course, the new group kind of popped up that
Yeah.
came from that group that's still doing this.
Mhm.
But the one thing I kind of wanted to say about that was that, when this conversion therapy um, is happening, when people are actually trying to convert people's sexual orientation to gender identities, often they realize that they can't actually do it, right? Even the
Mm.
therapists themselves realize we can't change people's sexual orientation or gender identity. And so they often come to a place where they say, well, we're not going to change your identity, but we're going to change the behaviors
Oh.
that you engage in. And when we think about that, that's just sad, right? What they're really saying is we can't change your authentic identity, but we can teach you and give you ways to avoid engaging
Yeah.
in those behaviors, which is
Yeah.
basically asking young people to live inauthentic lives, or
Right.
to never experience love and sex and the
Yeah.
joys of those types of things.
Mhm.
And yet, that's what this conversion therapy is kind of all about.
Yeah. And I think that, just to also zero in on this question of minors, or to give you a chance to talk about this, like I think one of the arguments that people are making in the oral arguments, who want the conversion, the people representing Childs, the lawyers representing Childs, are somebody should be free to seek out this particular therapy, right? So if I am a person and what I really want is I want to learn how to be straight and
Right.
Combat these feelings, it is my right to have a therapist who's going to help me with that. Let's talk about
Yeah.
some of the pitfalls of that argument.
Yeah. So, I can see why that's appealing, right? We want people to have autonomy in what they want to happen in therapy, and
Mhm.
certainly people could reasonably ask a professional mental health person for help trying to cope with these feelings they're having, and,
Mhm.
and maybe ways to not act on things right now, but
Mhm.
to ever suggest to a young person that they can be changed would just be wrong.
Yeah.
It seems to me to be more both efficacious and healthy to, like, instead ask the young people to think about, like, why don't you
Mhm.
want to let this authentic part of yourself emerge.
Mhm.
And likely what would come out would be because my parents would be upset, or my pastor would be upset, or I'm worried about being bullied in school.
Yeah.
And so as a society and a culture, we should be looking to, make this place a safer place
Mhm.
for these. But I certainly think people have a right to ask therapists for what they want, and then therapists, as medical health professionals,
Mhm.
need to follow the science,
Right.
right? And I could also go to my medical doctor and say something, like, I don't know, like, I really don't want my left eye anymore, and no medical professional is going to remove my left eye for me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Um, what else are you seeing in terms of policy or
Yeah.
or court cases that could impact the LGBTQ
Yeah.
community right now?
There's almost too much to talk about.
Yeah.
In class yesterday, we were actually looking at a research article that the title of the article was something like, "Does policy matter?" Right, and
Mm.
asking, and the research question was, when there's policies at city or state levels or federal levels that are anti-trans or anti-queer, does it have an effect on people? And the conclusion, of course, was yes. But
Mhm.
then in class, we then went into this legislation tracker that tracks
Oh.
anti-LGBTQ legislation, and 122 bills in the United States have passed in just 2025 so far, right? We're only beginning of October. And it was a wide range of things. So I had students in groups were kind of going through this list and picking one that they wanted to like present to the class and then link it back to this article that we had just discussed and read. And some of the things they brought up were the things around participation in athletics by trans people, which I find just so upsetting. This one bill that I believe was in Georgia was going to ban trans people even in middle school from participating in events and things. Some of these things were even co-ed things they weren't going to be allowed to participate in. Like only biological people identified as their biological sex at birth were going to be allowed to participate at all. So I'm very concerned about that. There's still ongoing bathroom bans, which happening. Things around in schools, what teachers are allowed to talk about, kind of don't say gay type of things are happening across many states right now. It's a rough time in this country to be LGBTQ.
Yeah, which will make this ruling even more important, right?
Yes.
How did you decide to become a social psychologist?
Yeah. Good question. I actually always thought I wanted to be a clinician. And then as I was applying to grad school many moons ago, I wanted to come to the West Coast. And at UCLA, there was a preeminent scholar named Ann Peplau who was doing queer research really before other people were doing it. And she was a social psychologist, and I wanted to apply to work with her. And so I only applied to 2 social programs. The rest were all clinical. But once I had the good fortune of getting into UCLA, it was just a no-brainer that I was coming to work with her and to learn how to surf. So I kind of became a social psychologist somewhat by accident because I wanted to work with Ann Peplau.
Yeah. And what are the types of courses you teach here?
I teach most often social psychology, which I always tell students is like my bread and butter. I love teaching that class. I always tell students I think it can make you a better person, a better citizen, a better parent, a better partner by learning the topics and concepts in that course. And I teach what I call my queer psych class. It's actually called the psychological study of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer experiences course. I'm currently teaching a graduate class on intimate relationships, which is a lot of fun to teach too.
That's a lot. And I think you also mentor, you also run the peer mentor program, yeah?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, what's that?
So the peer mentor program is a group of anywhere from 15 to 25 students each semester who want to help other psychology students. So we hold office hours, do workshops, make presentations in classes. And I've been doing this the entire time I've been here, actually. So for 20 years, I've been running the peer mentor program, which is such a privilege because I get to work with the kindest, smartest students in psychology.
Amazing. One of the things I love about the psych program are all the lab opportunities that your students have to really work one-on-one and in small groups to really research topics of their interest. What could students expect if they join the lab that you run with Professor Baker and Professor Perry?
So our lab is very big and very active. In different years, we kind of do different things. And so this year, we're really following the work of 9 grad students that I have in my lab. And by that, I mean we're pairing up undergrads and volunteers to support and help these projects. Other years, we do lab level projects where like the whole lab works together on one project. Last year, we were studying the coming out experiences of older queer people. So when they came out, kind of once they already established a heterosexual identity, but then came to understand themselves as a queer person. So that was a lot of fun. We both interviewed and then collected data from a whole bunch of people who came out much later in life. I think the oldest person was in their late 60s. So it was really fun to talk to people. A few years before that, we did a lot of work on consensual non-monogamy and looked at those experiences and kind of consequences for satisfaction and health and happiness.
Oh, wow. And for your particular field, for social psychology, what is it is it primarily surveys like you mentioned, or what
Yeah.
how is one a social
Yeah.
psychologist?
Usually, social psychologists rely heavily on experiments, right?
Mhm.
So we can kind of understand cause and effect. But because the topics that we're interested in, often we can't do experimental work. So
Mm,
we kind of use more mixed methods. We often start with interviewing people and then using our interviews to kind of inform
mm,
writing survey questions and putting together surveys. So kind of
mhm.
all over the place.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Um, do you take new students every year in your
Yeah,
lab?
we have a hard time saying no to students, which is
Yeah.
why our lab is very big. But yeah, so we have every semester new people join.
Mhm.
We have a little bit of a running joke that no one ever leaves, which is why we've gotten big. But I have some of the best students.
Wonderful. Thank you.